stood beside her, watching the sunrise with quiet patience. Amelia smiled at her companion, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for its presence. It had guided her through the garden, showing her the way to the heart of its magic, and she knew that their bond would only grow stronger in the days to come. With one last look at the glowing flowers and the shimmering pond, Amelia turned and made her way back toward the gate. As she reached for the latch, the iron vines began to twist back into place, slowly closing the gate behind her as if sealing the garden's magic away until the next night. But this time, the vines didn't feel like a barrier. They felt like a protection, a reminder that the garden was safe in her hands. As she stepped back through the gate, the garden disappeared behind her, fading into the quiet dawn as though it had never been there at all. But Amelia knew better. The garden was always there, waiting just beyond the veil of day, its magic ready to be awakened when the time was right. And as she walked back down the hill toward her village, her heart light and her mind full of wonder, she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey. The day unfolded slowly, with the usual routines of the village coming to life around her as she returned home. Amelia's parents were already up, preparing breakfast and talking about the day's plans, unaware of the extraordinary adventure she had just experienced. She joined them at the table, her mind still lingering in the garden, the magic of the night whispering at the edges of her thoughts. But as the sun rose higher and the world settled into its familiar rhythms, Amelia felt the weight of her new role pressing gently on her shoulders. She couldn't tell anyone about the garden, at least not yet. The knowledge of its existence and her connection to it was something she had to keep to herself, for now. The garden had trusted her with its secrets, and she knew that she had to protect it, just as the voice in the tree had told her. Amelia moved silently through the village streets, the soft light of dawn casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The houses, with their thatched roofs and weathered stone walls, were still, as if the entire village was in the final moments of sleep, just before the day truly began. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of dew-soaked grass and earth. It felt different now, after her time in the garden, almost as if the world had subtly shifted in ways only she could sense. The faint glow of the morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink, orange, and lavender. Above, the stars were slowly fading, retreating into the infinite expanse of blue that would soon take over the sky. Amelia took a deep breath, feeling the fresh morning air fill her lungs. Her steps were light, the memory of the magical night garden still fresh in her mind, as vivid as the moment she'd stepped through the gate. The world around her, though familiar, seemed different. Every detail stood out in sharper relief. The gentle sway of the wildflowers along the path, their petals still damp with dew, the soft rustling of the leaves overhead, catching the morning breeze as it whispered through the village. The birds were just beginning their dawn chorus, their songs echoing through the still air, each note crisp and clear. It was as if her senses had been heightened, as though she could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the life force of the world humming quietly just beneath the surface. Her cottage, tucked at the edge of the village, came into view, its whitewashed walls bathed in the soft golden light of the rising sun. The garden out front was small and modest, with neat rows of lavender and rosemary, their sweet fragrances filling the air around her home. The lavender flowers swayed gently in the breeze, the soft purple blossoms catching the light as they moved, while the rosemary's rich, earthy scent mingled with the dew-soaked grass. Amelia approached the front door slowly, her fingers tracing the smooth wood of the frame as she hesitated for a moment. Her heart was still in the night garden, her thoughts lingering on the magic she had discovered, the whisper of the trees, the glow of the flowers. But as she stood there, the familiar creak of the door sounded, and she pushed it open, stepping back into the warmth of her home. Inside, the air was filled with the comforting scents of bread and tea, and the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth greeted her. Her mother was already busy at the kitchen table, kneading dough for the morning's bread, while her father sat by the window, sipping a steaming cup of tea, his eyes distant as he gazed out over the fields. The quiet rhythm of their morning routine grounded her, though the magic of the garden still shimmered just beneath the surface of her thoughts. "Good morning, love," her mother said, glancing up with a warm smile as she shaped the dough into a neat loaf. Her hands moved deftly, the flour dusting the table in soft clouds with each movement. The smell of the dough, rich and yeasty, mingled with the faint scent of rosemary from the garden outside. "You're up early today." Amelia smiled and nodded, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with the pendant around her neck. She could feel the warmth of it, even now, a reminder of the magic it held and the secrets it had unlocked in the garden. She wondered if her mother had ever known the truth about the pendant, or if it had simply been passed down through the generations, its power forgotten with time. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice soft, as she made her way to the table and took a seat beside her father. His eyes, though tired, sparkled with a kind of quiet contentment as he watched the world outside. He was a man of the land, his hands calloused from years of working the fields, but his heart was gentle, and his connection to the earth ran deep. "I suppose the dawn has a way of calling us out," he said, his voice a low rumble that blended with the quiet hum of the morning. "It's good to walk in the early hours, when the world is still quiet." Amelia nodded, though she had walked much further than the village. Her thoughts were still in the garden, with the ancient tree and the silver fox. She could still feel the cool, moss-covered ground beneath her feet, the soft glow of the flowers lighting her path, the hum of the earth's magic resonating deep within her. The table was set simply, as it always was, with a loaf of fresh bread and a small pot of honey that gleamed golden in the morning light. Her mother moved gracefully around the kitchen, her apron swaying as she set a kettle on the stove to boil water for tea. The small clay cups lined up neatly on the table seemed to capture the warmth of the hearth, each one slightly different from the next, their surfaces worn smooth from years of use. The kitchen itself was cozy, filled with the subtle, familiar scents of herbs drying in bunches along the windowsill, their leaves still vibrant even as they crisped and curled. Amelia's eyes drifted to the rosemary hanging by the door, its fragrant sprigs tied with a length of twine that hung just above the threshold. Next to it, a cluster of sage and thyme released their earthy aromas, mingling with the lavender that filled a small vase on the windowsill, its flowers reaching toward the sun. Her mother's kitchen had always been a place of comfort, filled with the warm scent of baking bread and the subtle, soothing fragrance of herbs. But today, it felt like a small world compared to the vastness of the garden she had wandered through the night before. Still, she found solace in the simplicity of the moment. The quiet clatter of cups, the gentle murmur of her parents' voices, the warmth of the fire crackling softly in the hearth. As she sat there, her mind drifting between the present and the magic of the garden, she realized how different everything felt. The village, with its familiar routines and gentle rhythms, had always been her world. And yet, now it seemed small, almost like the surface of something deeper and far more intricate. Beneath the quiet life of the village, she could feel the hum of the earth, the pulse of something ancient and powerful, something she had only just begun to understand. After breakfast, as her mother prepared for the day ahead and her father left to tend to the fields, Amelia slipped outside, needing a moment alone. The air was warmer now, though the last remnants of the morning dew still clung to the grass, glittering like tiny jewels in the light of the rising sun. The village was waking up with the distant sound of voices and the occasional bark of a dog drifting through the air. But Amelia's thoughts were elsewhere. She stood at the edge of her garden, her eyes scanning the horizon, the fields stretching out before her in a patchwork of greens and golds. In the distance, beyond the rolling hills, the edge of the forest stood tall and dark, its trees towering like sentinels, guarding the secrets hidden within. She found herself thinking about the fox. Its silver fur had shimmered in the moonlight, and its eyes had been filled with a quiet wisdom that had spoken to her in ways no words ever could. The bond between them, though unspoken, felt strong, as though they were connected by some unseen thread, tied to the same ancient magic that filled the garden. The pendant around her neck seemed to hum softly, a reminder of the power it held. She reached up and ran her fingers over its smooth surface, feeling the cool metal warm beneath her touch. It was strange to think that this simple charm, which she had worn for years without truly understanding its significance, was the key to the garden's magic. The thought filled her with a sense of wonder, but also with a quiet weight of responsibility. As she stood there, lost in thought, the breeze stirred the leaves of the nearby trees, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The sound was soft and soothing, like the whisper of the garden's trees, reminding her of the voice she had heard in the clearing. The memory of the tree's smooth bark beneath her hand, the soft glow of its leaves in the moonlight, sent a shiver down her spine. She knew she would have to return. There was more to learn, more to discover, and the garden had chosen her for a reason. But how could she protect it? How could she guard something so ancient and fragile, something so powerful and yet so delicate? The thought both excited and frightened her, filling her with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The day passed slowly, the hours slipping by as Amelia went about her usual tasks, though her mind was never far from the garden. She worked in the village with the other young women, gathering herbs and tending to the small vegetable plots that dotted the edges of the fields. The rhythm of the work was calming, the familiar motions of digging in the earth and tending to the plants grounding her in the present. But every now and then, as she bent to pull a weed or tied a bundle of herbs, she felt the pendant against her chest, its weight a constant reminder of the night before. She couldn't help but glance toward the distant forest, her heart tugging her thoughts back to the garden, to the magic that still lingered in the air. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Amelia made her way back to the cottage. The air was warm and still, the golden light of the setting sun bathing everything in a soft, rosy glow. The village was quiet now, the day's work done, and the smell of cooking fires drifted through the air as the family settled in for the evening. Inside the cottage, her mother was humming softly to herself as she stirred a pot over the fire, the rich scent of stew filling the air. Her father sat by the hearth, his pipe in hand, the soft glow of the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. It was a scene of quiet domesticity, one that should have filled her with comfort. But tonight, Amelia's mind was elsewhere. As the evening wore on, she excused herself early, claiming fatigue from the day's work. Her parents didn't question her, and as soon as she was alone in her room, she slipped on her cloak and tucked the pendant beneath her shirt, its familiar weight pressing softly against her skin. The moon was already rising as she stepped outside, its pale light casting the village in soft silver. The stars had begun to twinkle overhead, tiny pinpricks of light in the deepening sky, and the night air was cool and fresh, carrying with it the scent of wild flowers and pine. Amelia made her way back to the edge of the village, her heart beating faster with each step as she approached the familiar path that led to the old stone wall. The night garden awaited her, its magic humming in the air, drawing her closer with every breath. The forest loomed before her, dark and quiet, the trees standing tall like silent sentinels. But this time, she didn't hesitate. The pendant glowed faintly beneath her shirt, guiding her steps as she slipped through the shadows and made her way toward the gate. When she reached the garden, the iron vines had already begun to twist and curl, untangling themselves from the gate as though they had been waiting for her return. The gate creaked open softly, and without a second thought, Amelia stepped inside. The garden was as beautiful as she remembered, bathed in the soft glow of the moon, its flowers blooming in a riot of colors that shimmered in the pale light. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering softly, and the air was thick with the sweet scent of jasmine and honeysuckle. But tonight, the garden felt different. The energy in the air was stronger, more intense, as though the very earth beneath her feet was alive with magic. The glowing orbs drifted lazily through the air, their light casting soft shadows that danced across the ground as they moved. Amelia's heart raced with anticipation as she made her way through the garden, the familiar path leading her deeper into its heart. The silver fox appeared once again, stepping out from the shadows as if it had been waiting for her. Its eyes gleamed in the moonlight, and without a sound, it began to walk beside her, guiding her through the garden's mysteries once more. Together they followed the narrow path through the trees, the night alive with the hum of magic, until they reached the clearing where the ancient tree stood. Its bark glowed softly, the silvery light illuminating the clearing, and its leaves rustled gently in the breeze, as though welcoming her back. Amelia approached the tree slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the energy pulsing in the air around her, the magic of the garden stronger than ever before. The pendant around her neck hummed softly, resonating with the power that filled the clearing. And as she reached out to touch the tree's bark, she felt the familiar warmth spread through her fingers. The voice came to her again, soft and gentle, like the whisper of the wind through the leaves. "Welcome back, Keeper." Amelia stood before the ancient tree, her fingers lightly brushing the smooth, glowing bark. The warmth of the tree spread through her hand and into her arm, filling her with a familiar sense of belonging, as if the magic of the garden had accepted her completely. The night air was still, but alive with energy, the soft rustling of the leaves above her head blending with the quiet hum of the garden. The silver fox sat beside her, its intelligent eyes watching her closely, as though waiting for her next move. The tree's voice, soft and ancient, whispered through her thoughts once again, calm and reassuring. "You have returned, as you were meant to. The garden is ready for you, and you are ready for it." Amelia felt the pendant against her chest grow warmer, pulsing with a quiet energy that matched the rhythm of the tree's magic. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs, and stepped closer to the tree, her hand pressed firmly against its bark. This time, she felt something different, a gentle tug, like a current of energy flowing from the tree into her. It wasn't overwhelming or frightening. Rather, it felt natural, as if she were being drawn into a deeper connection with the magic of the garden. The world around her seemed to slow, the gentle sway of the trees, the glow of the flowers, even the quiet hum of the air. Everything softened, as though the garden itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Without fully understanding why, Amelia closed her eyes, trusting the pull of the magic. Her senses heightened in the darkness behind her eyelids, and she became acutely aware of the energy around her, a deep hum that resonated in her chest, in her bones. She could feel the life of the garden, not just the trees and flowers, but the very soil beneath her feet, the roots stretching deep into the earth, the quiet, patient pulse of life that flowed through every living thing around her. The tree's voice spoke again, quieter this time, almost as if it were speaking directly into her thoughts. "The garden is ancient, Amelia, as old as the stars themselves. It has waited for a keeper, one who understands the language of the earth and the whispers of the wind. That is why you are here." Amelia's heart swelled with the weight of those words. She had always felt a connection to the natural world, even as a child, but now that connection felt deeper, more profound. The garden wasn't just a place of magic. It was alive, a living entity that had been waiting for someone to care for it, to protect its secrets. She opened her eyes, her hand still resting on the tree, and looked around the clearing. The silvery glow of the flowers seemed brighter now, their soft light casting long shadows across the ground. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, sweet and intoxicating, mingling with the earthy fragrance of moss and damp soil. The night felt both familiar and otherworldly, as though she stood at the edge of two worlds, the ordinary and the extraordinary, where anything was possible. As she stood there, the fox padded silently over to her side. It brushed against her leg, its fur cool and sleek, and then sat at her feet, its sharp eyes scanning the clearing as if it, too, was attuned to the magic that filled the air. Amelia smiled down at it, grateful for its presence. The fox had been her guide since the moment she stepped into the garden, and now it felt like an old friend, a companion in this strange, wonderful place. The garden, she realized, was vast, far larger than she had first imagined. Beyond the clearing, the trees stretched endlessly into the distance, their canopies thick and dark, concealing whatever mysteries lay beyond. She hadn't yet explored the far reaches of the garden, but she knew that there was much more to discover, more secrets waiting to be uncovered. You are its keeper now, the tree's voice echoed in her mind. You will learn its ways, its paths, its stories. The garden will reveal itself to you, little by little, as it has waited for this moment for so long. Amelia nodded, though the weight of those words settled heavily in her chest. The responsibility felt immense, but at the same time, she knew it was where she belonged. She was the keeper of the garden, chosen by the magic itself, and she would protect it with everything she had. She felt a pull toward the path beyond the clearing, as though the garden was beckoning her deeper, inviting her to explore its hidden corners. Without a word, she began to walk, the silver fox trotting at her side. The path wound through the trees, narrow and overgrown in places, but illuminated by the soft glow of the flowers that lined the way. Each step she took felt deliberate, purposeful, as though the garden was guiding her toward something. The trees here were taller, their branches twisting overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. The air was cooler, carrying the scent of damp leaves and rich soil, and the sounds of the night creatures became more distant, muffled by the thick foliage. The glow of the flowers became her only light, their soft, pale luminescence casting a faint halo around her as she moved deeper into the heart of the garden. After what felt like hours, she came upon a second clearing, smaller than the first, but no less magical. In the center of the clearing stood a stone fountain, its surface covered in moss and ivy, as though it had been there for centuries, forgotten by time. Water trickled from the mouth of a stone-carved animal, a stag, its antlers reaching toward the sky, into a shallow pool below, the sound of the water soft and soothing in the quiet night. Amelia approached the fountain slowly, her eyes fixed on the water as it shimmered in the pale light of the flowers. She knelt at the edge of the pool and dipped her fingers into the cool water, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The fountain, like the tree, pulsed with the same quiet magic that filled the garden. It was ancient, alive in its own way, and its presence filled the clearing with a sense of calm and serenity.